In the small, isolated village of Eldridge Hollow, a place where stories of the past lingered like a heavy mist on a chilly morning, shadows gathered around the ancient stone bridge. This bridge arched gracefully over a murky creek, its jagged edges and crumbling mortar told tales of ages long gone. It was not just a bridge, it was a silent sentinel, an old guardian of forgotten secrets. The villagers knew it well, and many spoke about the eerie aura that seemed to seep from the very stones. It was said that the spirits of the past still roamed in these parts, their whispers curling into the ears of anyone who dared come close, much like fog creeping silently over a landscape at night. The chilling legend wrapped around Eldridge Hollow like a cloying fog that wouldn't lift, holding the village in its tight grip. Parents would gather their children close on chilly evenings and share hushed whispers about the grotesque rituals that had once taken place at the bridge, terrible blood sacrifices meant to appease the restless spirits trapped within the stones. The children listened with wide eyes, soaking up each dreadful word, and knowing that they must stay away from the bridge. It was a rule of the town. Those who ventured too near would surely be cursed. They would have their fates entwined with the forsaken souls that dwelled beneath. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle like tiny jewels in the night sky, a palpable fear settled over Eldridge Hollow. The kind of fear that squeezed at one's heart and snatched away the warmth of brave thoughts. Even the bravest of souls would feel it creeping under their skin as darkness enveloped their little world. It was on one such fateful night that Danny, a curious boy of 12, stood at the edge of his doorstep, staring into the shadows. He felt the impending tension saturating the air, yet the mysterious allure of the unknown tugged at his adventurous spirit, making him feel brave enough to take a step out into the darkness. With wide eyes that glinted with excitement, and a heart full of daring thoughts, Danny tiptoed out of his home, leaving the warmth of the inside behind. The cool air filled his lungs as he stepped into the night. The shadows around him beckoned closer, whispering secrets he longed to uncover. Underneath his feet, the crisp, crackling leaves provided a soft soundtrack to what felt like his very own secret adventure. Each step he took weighed thick with a combination of excitement and fear, pulling him further down a path that led straight toward the ominous structure. The moon hung high and full, casting a silvery glow that illuminated everything in its path. But for Danny, the light felt inadequate against the heavy darkness that awaited him. The stories of those who had vanished at the bridge flickered in his imagination, chilling him to the bone. He imagined the grip of chilling hands lurking just below the surface of the murky water, ready to snatch him away into the depths of despair. He hesitated for just a moment, his heart pounding fiercely in his chest, wondering if he should turn back to the safety of home. But the whispers grew louder, weaving their way through the air like an enchanting spell, tugging insistently at his resolve. Finally, his courage overtook him. Stepping onto the bridge, the uneven cobblestones caused him to stumble slightly. The air turned heavy around him as if an unsettling presence watched his every move, and the stones themselves felt alive with an ancient magic. As he crept midway across, a sudden chill swept through the air, rustling the trees nearby and sending prickles across the surface of his skin. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement beneath the bridge, a dark, flowing shape that slithered across the water, drawing deeply on his fear. He swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten with a terrible unease. Then, the night air turned electric as a disembodied whisper echoed from the stones, a guttural sound that sent shivers racing up his spine. Danny's mind began to race with questions. Who had whispered? What did they want from him? Ignoring the warnings of his instincts, he leaned closer to the edge, peering into the murky depths below. Suddenly, a face emerged from the water, a contorted and malformed visage, pale and haunting, with hollow eyes and a menacing grin. It was such a grotesque sight that Danny nearly stumbled backward, overwhelmed by a mix of disgust and terror. Heart racing wildly, he stepped back from the edge, realizing he was not alone. The shadows, once mere shapes in the darkness, began to swirl around him, swirling like a storm with sinister intent. Whispers began to fill the air around him, beckoning him to stay, to listen. The stories passed down through the villagers about blood sacrifices echoed in his mind, how offerings were once thrown into the churning waters to appease the spirits lingering below. Deep down, the realization washed over him. The remnants of those sacrifices might still dwell beneath the bridge, forever entwined with the very fabric of its existence. Just then, A sound broke through the tumult of whispers, a pair of soft footsteps approaching. Danny turned, startled, to see a girl emerging from the shadows. She seemed to be about his age, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. Moonlight bathed her face, emphasizing her already pale complexion. "You shouldn't be here," she warned urgently, her voice barely above a whisper. "People who come here, they don't return." Danny hesitated, caught between the urge to flee from this strange place and the desire to learn more about the girl's story. "I'm not afraid," he replied, trying to sound braver than he felt. "I want to know what happened here." His voice wobbled slightly, a telltale sign of the fear pooling in his stomach. The girl shook her head vigorously, her long hair fluttering in the chilly breeze. "The bridge holds secrets too terrible to understand. They took my brother. I can still hear him calling." Her voice quivered, filled with the weight of despair. Danny felt a wave of sympathy for her plight and sensed the shadow of her loss pressing against him, but still, a nagging curiosity urged him to take a step closer to danger. "Let's find out together," he said, feeling a sudden and wild sense of destiny guiding his words. The girl's expression shifted, caught between hope and fear, as she considered his offer. He reached out and took her hand, their young fingers intertwined in that tense moment. Together, they stepped deeper into the bridge's sinister embrace, their breaths mingling in the thick, foreboding air. As they ventured further, an unholy wind whipped around them, filled with a cacophony of voices, mournful and angry, echoing inside their heads. The air turned suffocating, heavy with the sweet yet cloying scent of decay that hung in the air. Shadows twisted and turned, forming grotesque shapes that danced along the edges of their vision, mocking them as they moved forward. Each step felt weighted with the burdens of the past, as if the ghosts of the sacrificial victims were sharing their sorrow with the living, enveloping them in a shroud of despair. Danny's and the girl's hearts raced in tandem, and despite the growing sense of foreboding that gripped them like a vice, something deep within beckoned them to keep moving forward. As they journeyed deeper into the shadows, the uneven stones beneath their feet changed, shifting as if they were alive. Time felt distorted here. Moments stretched into eternity, making Danny question how long they had been wandering. The musty air thickened, causing each breath to feel laborious, energized by the whispers that surged in and out of consciousness, urging them onward. Then, they stumbled upon hidden burnt offerings, remnants of dreadful rituals dating back generations. Jagged pieces of bone lay scattered among the ashes, relics of past acts that sent shudders through Danny's body. The realization crashed over him like a wave. These were the very sacrifices the villagers had warned about. Fear gripped his stomach like a clenched fist, and the air around them began to swell with the sickening scent of blood and loss. The girl clutched his arm tightly, her eyes widening in horror as she took in the dark tableau before them. "Danny, we shouldn't be here," she cried, her voice shaky and filled with dread. It was then that the whispers spiraled into a crescendo, rising in volume until they became a deafening roar, their collective despair piercing through the stillness like an anguished wail. As Danny stood frozen, the stones beneath them shuddered violently, a reaction to their disturbance. Mighty shadows danced with rage and anguish, swirling around them, threatening to drown them in despair. Suddenly, the dark atmosphere shifted dramatically. The shadows coiled tighter around them, and the whispers transformed into shouts, furious accusations and lamentations echoing in their ears. The ground beneath the bridge began trembling fiercely, jagged rocks cracking and fissures forming. Some ancient force had awakened, something that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. The spirits were restless, their hunger reignited by the presence of the living. Danny felt a rush of dread surge through his veins as the air grew dense with foreboding. That small inner voice, the one that cried out for him to leave, became louder, battling against the darkness that tugged him forward. He glanced at the girl beside him, her face a mask of fear as she urged him to retreat. "We have to go now," she insisted, her voice tinged with panic. But the captivating pull of the spirits and what they held kept Danny's feet glued to the spot. Every fiber of his being begged him to listen to the terrible whispers beckoning him closer. "Wait," he said, feeling a mix of trepidation and reckless bravery. "What if we can talk to them? What if we can understand what they want?" His voice trembled with a mixture of fear and excitement, brewing in him an inexplicable sense of purpose. Before the girl could respond, the tension in the air reached a breaking point. The whispers swelled into a gale, clashing around them like a raging storm. Shadows pulled tighter, consuming any flicker of safety that remained. Danny's heart raced, thundering in his chest like a war drum. He was standing at the edge of the abyss stretched out in front of him, filled with horror and fear, yet something inside him whispered of destiny pulling him closer to the unknown. In that moment, Danny took a step forward, crossing the threshold into uncertainty, the darkness beckoning him deeper into the mysteries that lay beneath the ancient stones of the bridge. Together with the girl, they stepped into the swirling shadows, a choice made amid the whispers in the dark that promised secrets, perhaps salvation, or endless despair. No one could tell what awaited them on the other side, only that the bridge was alive with echoes of the past, and the spirits were eager to share their story. The bridge roared to life around Danny as he crossed the threshold. The sound of creaking wood and cracking stone filled the air like the voices of those trapped in anguish. It was as though the bridge itself had come alive, each groan and snap resonating deeply, echoing the pain of forgotten souls. The world around him seemed to shift, twisting and turning in a way that made him feel dizzy, as if the ground beneath him was swaying like a boat caught in a storm. The air was thick and heavy, feeling almost alive, wrapping around him with choking tendrils that made it hard to breathe. He could feel an unsettling sensation, like sharp eyes boring into his soul from the darkness surrounding them, a weight so immense it felt almost unbearable. Next to him, the girl, once filled with so much light and hope, began to falter. Her grip on his hand slipped as waves of dread rushed over her, crashing against her resolve. In that moment, Danny felt something stir deep within him, an irresistible pull that tugged at his heart, beckoning him to step further into the shadows of the bridge. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if the very stones beneath his feet were calling his name, urging him deeper into the unknown. "Danny, we need to go." The girl's voice cut through the suffocating silence, ringing out in desperation. It reverberated back at them, swallowed almost entirely by the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded them. Panic tightened its grip around her throat, and her wide eyes darted about, searching for a way out. But Danny found himself entranced, captivated by a morbid fascination that pulled him toward the darkness, a feeling as intoxicating as honey yet laced with the sharpness of fear. The stone walls, marked with ancient symbols that twisted and turned like the branches of a gnarled old tree, almost seemed to pulse with a strange, malevolent rhythm, synchronized with the frantic beating of his heart. A low growl reverberated from the depths of the darkness, rattling Danny's bones and sending shivers skittering down his spine. The remains of long-forgotten sacrifices lay scattered beneath the bridge, jagged bones, pieces of decayed flesh clinging to the weathered stones, forming a nightmarish mosaic that filled him with dread. As he peered closer, unsettling emotions collided within him, a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The air around him seemed to thrum with an unholy power radiating from the remnants of those lost souls, trapped and doomed to linger eternally in despair. A grotesque reality flickered to life in his mind, a cycle of death that haunted the village and its people, driven by the need to placate the very spirits that prowled beneath the bridge. As he stepped further into the sinister atmosphere, flickers of light from the moon barely broke through the thick shadows, illuminating the grotesque offerings lying beneath layers of debris. Bones intertwined with matted strands of hair, once attached to living beings, shriveled remnants of life etched into the history of the bridge. It was more than just a graveyard, it was a grotesque symphony of sorrow, a chilling reminder that human lives had paid the ultimate price for the villagers' fragile peace. Each twisted joint and shattered fragment whispered stories of despair, a chorus of voices long forgotten, calling out for justice, for acknowledgement. "What have they done?" The girl's voice trembled, her skin pale as a wisp of cloud. Shock and disbelief rendered her nearly incapacitated, her hands shaking as she squeezed Danny's arm harder. Their breath hung in the cold air like a putrid mist, sealing their fate in this sinister place, their youthful hope dimming. Yet within Danny, an ember of courage flickered in defiance, a surge of urgency calling him to grasp the truth buried deep among the bones. If he could understand, if he could find a way to commune with these lost souls, perhaps there was a chance to find a way to set them free. "Maybe they are waiting for us," Danny responded, his voice steady despite the dread that entwined with his heart. "They just want to be heard." The words felt hollow even as he spoke them, an echo that barely masked the ominous chill slithering down his spine as he realized the shadows looming around them were growing darker, more palpable with each passing moment. Little did he know that the dead did not crave understanding. They craved something entirely different, blood, a hunger born from relentless torment. "Danny, we shouldn't be here." The girl's voice was barely above a whisper, trembling as she looked between him and the darkened depths that seemed to beckon them closer. "You don't understand." She grasped his arm desperately, her eyes wide and terrified, darting from the offerings to the yawning abyss below. But despite her fear, Danny was lost in the gravity of the moment, the weight of a destiny calling forth as if the very spirits themselves were echoing the need for someone brave enough to approach the truth. In that moment, driven by something far deeper than mere curiosity, Danny knelt beside the remnants. He felt a solemn determination rising within him. He longed to offer a gift, a gesture of peace to quell the torment consuming the spirits that seemed eternally entwined with the darkness of this bridge. Closing his eyes, he searched deep within the marrow of his soul, contemplating a blood sacrifice, the ultimate offering that could appease those forsaken spirits imprisoned beneath the bridge. Even as he imagined splintering his own flesh for them, a haunting voice reverberated around him, grating against his very essence. "Blood will bind, blood will claim, blood will forever hate." Suddenly, the shadows contorted and twisted, morphing into faces frozen in agony, unearthly visages that seemed to claw their way into the light. Whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices crying out in unison, warning him, pleading with him to retreat. It was a clamor so intense that it blocked out everything else. "Danny, please!" The girl screamed, her terror mingling with despair as she inched back, ready to escape this horrifying place. But Danny remained firm, captivated within the cold, monolithic grip of the horrors lurking beneath the bridge. In that moment, an intoxicating realization surged through him: he could set them free. This was his destiny, his purpose emerging from the chaos surrounding them. A vision of blood-soaked offerings danced in his mind, an offering so potent that it would fulfill the promise owed to the forgotten souls. The knowledge brushed against his heart, a whisper of dread coupled with excitement. Maybe, just maybe, he could finally fulfill the promises made long ago, willingly paying the price that hung so heavily over the village, a grim history marred with death and doom. Without thinking, without hesitating, Danny made the ultimate decision. He wouldn't just be the summoner. He'd become one with the spirits, entombed with them forever. "Let's do this," he whispered with grim resolve, lifting his gaze to the girl whose expression shifted from shock to horror, eyes glistening with disbelief. The shadows seemed to close in around him, their insatiable hunger awakened by his foolish bravery. The stones beneath him murmured eerily in proximity, a menacing symphony that played against the night, filling it with a sense of impending doom. In that moment, as he marveled at the unholy energy around them, a jagged bone shard gleamed, catching the streaks of moonlight filtering through the shadows. Danny reached for the shard, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation, a primal instinct igniting the air around him. "This is our chance. We can change everything." His voice resonated with enthusiasm, disturbing, almost unhinged, as he pressed the shard against his palm. The fleeting moment of life meeting the inevitable. Mortal sacrifice offered in hopes of appeasing the tormented. With a swift motion, Danny drew the shard across his skin. Pain erupted instantly, sharp and feverish, radiating throughout his body. Blood welled up, pooling on the ground beneath him, a vivid shade of crimson betraying the darkness smothering the air. The girl gasped, stepping back as the horrific scene unfolded before her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. The power shifted in the very structure of the bridge. It trembled, quaking under the insatiable hunger of the damned. Shadows spiraled down from the bridge, drawing closer, ravenous for his essence. "You should run," Danny shouted, the thrill coursing through him counteracting any rational thought. With each drop of blood that hit the stones, a violent wave swept through the sacrificial offerings. It was a response from the entities lurking close to their domain. The voices surged to a deafening crescendo. A name echoed through the archways of memory, a portent, a reminder of the multitude that had suffered. "No," the girl cried out, stumbling backward. "What are you doing? Stop!" Her pleas, desperate and full of horror, faded into the howling winds as the ethereal screams of the spirits grew louder, merging together into an agonizing symphony of rage and longing. Danny realized too late, he was not simply summoning them, he was inviting them into the mortal realm. This was not a sacrificial piece, it was an awakening, and in that moment, he felt the connection of blood threading through him to the darkness. Something slithered up from the depths, a grotesque figure materializing in the gloom. Its head raised slowly, eyes glimmering with a terrifying lust for life and presence. "You've offered what we sought," it hissed, a guttural voice reverberating through the air like thunder, shaking the ground beneath them. Danny felt a surge of victory, an unfathomable thrill pulsing through him like electricity. He had stepped beyond fear into the unknown, and it had drawn forth their deepest desires. But then the encounter shifted, suddenly darkened by the terrifying realization that they had no intention of claiming him in gratitude. They desired his very essence, and the hunger that had drawn him here was not to be tamed. It was a ravenous beast craving the blood not as an offering, but as fuel to terrorize. The figure extended its ghastly form toward him, ghostly fingers twisted and sharp, reaching out with an emptiness that sent a chill coursing through his veins. Danny had called for them, he had invited them into the world of the living, and there would be no turning back. In that horrific moment, Danny felt a wave of vertigo wash over him. He had become a vessel, an offering, a bait for the insatiable hunger of the darkness. The shadows surged forward, a violent wave of despair and malevolence that pushed against him, consuming everything in its wake. Despite the girl's chilling cries urging him to return to safety, the bridge claimed him, devouring every part of his essence, leaving him tethered to the cursed stones for eternity. The very structure of the bridge shuddered as if it rejoiced at the successful lure it had cast upon another unsuspecting soul. Danny's screams mingled with the cacophony of tortured souls as he vanished into the abyss, engulfed by shadows that whispered a symphony of grief while the girl watched, paralyzed by horror, knowing she had lost her friend to the darkness that lingered beneath the cursed bridge. And as the night deepened, the bridge stood quiet again, its secrets buried beneath layers of sorrow, waiting for the next wandering souls drawn in by the haunting call of the entombed. The village of Eldridge Hollow was once again shrouded in a thick veil of mist. The fog curled and twisted around every building, wrapping it in a soft, eerie silence. The air felt heavy, almost thick enough to taste, and it carried whispers of despair that seemed to echo from the very ground. Days turned into weeks, yet the sad echoes of Danny's last moments never disappeared from the minds of the villagers. They often looked towards the haunted bridge at the edge of the village, a structure that now felt like a painful memory frozen in time. Children whispered stories about the bridge, telling tales of a brave boy named Danny who had ventured into the heart of darkness and never returned. Each story was embellished with fear and imagination, painting Danny as a hero and a tragic figure at once. Those who lived nearby, who used to cross the bridge with ease during the day, now found themselves glancing at it with anxiety as night fell. All of them were terrified, constantly wondering if the bridge still held onto the remnants of the past, a past that had swallowed the boy whole. In the middle of all this sorrow was a girl, heartbroken and traumatized, who had become a mere shadow of her former self. Her once bright eyes were now dull, as though the sparkle had been snuffed out like a candle in a storm. Driven by guilt, she felt as if she was dragging a massive, invisible weight behind her wherever she went. It was impossible to escape the horrific memories that played over and over in her mind like a scratched record. Each night, she would lay in bed, unable to sleep, hearing the soft, guttural whispers beneath her window. It felt as if Danny's tormented soul was reaching out, still searching for solace and companionship. She could recall vividly how the air had turned thick with regret as she stood frozen, watching her friend tumble into the pit of horror, entangled with shadows he had so recklessly invoked. The girl wandered through the village, a living testament to sorrow. Where she once ran and played, her laughter echoing through the streets, she now moved like a ghost, marked by her familiar grief. The villagers grew wary of her presence. She was an outcast, tethered to the inexplicable loss that left a haunting imprint on her heart. Days turned into weeks, and those weeks morphed into months. She often found herself drifting back to the bridge, as though it was a part of her she could never fully escape. There was a strange bond forged in the darkness, a connection that was as unholy as it was magnetic. On particularly still nights, when the pale moon hung high above, she would stand on the bank of the creek that flowed beneath the bridge. Her heart felt like it was in pieces, each one heavier than the last. A chill would crawl along her spine every time she scanned the grotesque arch of the bridge, half expecting to see Danny's familiar face peeking through the shadows. Instead, she was met with an overwhelming darkness, thick and suffocating, that enveloped the structure like a heavy blanket. It was malevolent, pulsating as if it were alive and beckoning her closer, whispering sinister promises that made her skin prickle. Each visit became a test of her resolve. She hoped desperately to feel a connection to Danny, to see a flicker of his spirit, anything that would let her know he was still with her somehow. One night, filled with overwhelming emotion, she formed intentions of repentance, drawing up the courage to speak into the emptiness. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into the void, tears streaming down her face. "I could have stopped you." Her voice trembled as she finished her confession, the words hanging heavy in the cool night air. Yet beneath the bridge, the spirits stirred uneasily. They were disturbed by her words, riled by the memories of Danny's desperate offering. He had unleashed their fury into the realm of the living, and they were not easily quelled. In the dull glow of the moonlight, an unholy wind began to whisper secrets in her ears. Each word dripped with despair, a sickening reminder of what once was. "You cannot contain our hunger," they echoed ominously in the stillness. One fateful evening, drawn too deeply into the web of memory, she stepped onto the bridge. Her hesitation was overtaken by an overpowering urge. The ground beneath her felt alive, pulsating as if it held unspeakable history, curling and yawning like a dormant monster eagerly awaiting fresh offerings. Heavy clouds drifted in, swallowing the moon and plunging the world into darkness, an omen of the lurking horror that lay just beneath the surface. "No," she shuddered, grappling with her sanity, yet somehow found herself unable to retreat. Instead, a terrible pull drew her closer to the center of the bridge. Shadows twisted around her legs like a haunting embrace, foreshadowing what awaited her within the darkness. It was then that she felt their presence creeping in, unfurling from the chasms of the bridge. Each movement was slick and predatory, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Join us," the voices whispered in unison, their tones clawing at her very being. A familiar fear gripped her heart, squeezing it until she gasped for breath. The tormented wails of lost souls echoed in her ears as they closed in around her, hungry for companionship. The same hunger she had felt since the loss of Danny. "You are bound by blood," they promised, their voices weaving a web of despair around her. In a moment of insufficient clarity, the memories of Danny's fate flashed before her. She was gripped by an overwhelming sense of guilt and longing. Could he still be reached? Did she hold the power to alter their dark pact? With her pulse racing, she sank to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of sacrifice. Even if she had to give up her own life, could that satisfy their insatiable hunger? Would it free Danny from the torment? With trembling hands, she pulled out a jagged stone she had found during one of her visits, a grim trophy from the depths of despair. It glinted in the half-light, reminding her of the gruesome offerings of the past. The bridge seemed to vibrate under her touch, urging her forward, alive with unholy anticipation. She felt the shadows drawing closer, and the memory of Danny's face flooded her heart, twisting it painfully until she could barely breathe. Their friendship had been torn apart, and for what? She pressed the jagged stone against her palm, feeling the sharpness as terror and dread swirled within her. "This sacrifice is for you, Danny," she murmured, standing on the brink of recklessness and resolve. In a sudden movement, she pressed down into her flesh, gasping as pain shot through her. Blood pooled beneath her like a crimson teardrop, merging with the unending stain on the bridge, a glimpse of all those lost to the depths of despair. As her lifeblood seeped onto the stones, the whispers rose to a roaring crescendo. Shadows clamored upon her, swirling and converging around her body, their hunger ignited by the scent of fresh sacrifice. This was not a desperate plea. It was, instead, a perilous invitation. She trembled, surrendering to the foreboding presence that surrounded her, seemingly welcoming her into its chilling embrace. "Free us," they hissed, their voices a haunting chorus filled with longing that crackled in the air like thunder. A thick emotion flooded through her, drowning out all thoughts, a pull that beckoned her to step into the eternal twilight that lay beneath the arch of stone. But deep down, she realized this would not bind Danny. It would only deepen the chasm of despair that consumed them both. As the darkness enveloped her, she felt the bitter realization claw at her throat. She had become part of the very tale she wished to rewrite, a mere character trapped in a story that would never have an end. Shadows engulfed her entirely, and she felt herself fading, becoming just another lost whisper under the bridge, a soul entwined in the cycles of horror. Even in those final moments, as she became one with the shadows, she clung to the hope that perhaps, somehow, she could still reach Danny. Perhaps they would be united again, not as tormented souls, but as friends who had battled against the darkness together. The cycle of horror would continue through the ages, and the bridge would forever be a place of eerie stories and haunted memories, but maybe, just maybe, love could bridge that terrible divide. But for now, the bridge held the remnants of their lost souls, and the air would forever be heavy with the whispers of despair. As the mist rolled on, so too would the stories of Danny and the girl. A poignant warning for those who dared venture too close to the magical, yet treacherous, veil woven between the worlds of the living and the lost. Years passed in the small village of Eldridge Hollow, and everything began to change, but not in a good way. The sun still rose in the morning, and the moon still glowed at night, but an uncomfortable feeling settled over the town like a heavy blanket. There was a whole world of sadness lurking behind every door, in every corner, and in the hearts of every villager. The bridge, they called it Blood Sacrifice Bridge, stood tall and eerie, a grim reminder of those who had vanished from the village. Time was supposed to heal wounds, but here, it only deepened them. The bridge was old and worn, its stones thick with moss and the creep of time. Villagers told stories of those who had walked across its creaky boards, Danny and a girl who had slipped into the night, never to return. Their legacy lived on, wrapped in layers of hushed voices and nervous glances. Each story was like a ghost that floated in the air, warning young hearts to stay away, to be wary of the darkness. As children grew up listening to these tales, they found it impossible to shake off the chill those stories left behind. They played games and roamed without fear, but deep down, they held a thread of caution woven tightly into their lives. The local tavern was the heart of Eldridge Hollow, filled with villagers who sought comfort in the company of one another. The soft light from the flickering candles danced along the worn wooden tables, where the townsfolk gathered like moths to a flame. As they sipped their drinks, they exchanged whispers about the cursed bridge, their voices a blend of fear and wonder. "Did you hear about Danny?" one would murmur quietly, glancing toward the door as if the air itself might be listening. The stories twisted in the warm glow of the tavern, becoming warnings and threats, each retelling painting a more vivid picture of despair. The bridge loomed over the village, barely visible through a thick blanket of fog that never seemed to lift. It was as if nature itself mourned the vanished souls, shrouded in sadness. And yet, there was something about the bridge that sparked curiosity, especially in the younger minds, full of bravado and eagerness to challenge the unknown. They sat with their friends, sharing whispered tales of bravery and heroic deeds, giggling nervously as they tried to appear unaffected. "What if we went to the bridge?" one child suggested, eyes wide with mischief. Laughter erupted like fireworks, but it was a laugh tinged with fear, echoing all the warnings they had ever heard. On a night when the moon glowed like a silver coin in the sky, a group of older children decided it was time to put their dare to the test. The air was crisp, and they could hear the leaves crunch beneath their feet like brittle paper as they made their way toward the haunted bridge. With every step, their hearts thrummed with excitement and fear, a rhythm that matched the pounding in their chests. The laughter faded into silence, replaced by the sound of their collective breath, anticipation hanging thick in the air. When they finally reached the center of the bridge, everything changed. The air turned chilled and heavy, as if the bridge itself held its breath. "What's the worst that could happen?" one of them announced, an uncertain grin plastered across his face. But their laughter faded, and soon, only silence surrounded them. They huddled close together, peering into the abyss below. It was dark down there, almost like looking down into a bottomless pit filled with secrets and shadows. One child leaned over the edge, just as Danny had done all those years before. His heart raced, and a shiver ran down his spine. "Maybe it's just a story," he whispered, trying to convince himself as well as the others. As he looked into the murky depths, the darkness seemed to pulse, alive with unseen eyes staring back at him. For a fleeting moment, the air around them shifted, and it almost felt as though something shifted beneath the bridge. A soft, eerie whisper floated on the wind, curling around their senses as if reaching for them. "We are waiting," it chanted, a haunting melody that sent chills racing up their spines. The group's excitement turned to unease, glances exchanged like secret messages. There was something unsettling in the air now, something they couldn't quite name, yet it wrapped around them like tendrils of fog. Uncertain but unable to resist, they moved closer to the railing, drawn in by a combination of fright and intrigue. The tales they had grown up with surged in their minds, begging to be acknowledged. What were the voices below? Who were they calling for? They leaned over, filled with a blend of childish courage and trepidation, captivated by the stories they had heard all their lives. Suddenly, like a clap of thunder on a clear day, a wail erupted from the depths below, slicing through the stillness. The sound echoed through the night as shook the bridge beneath their feet. The shadows stirred with violent energy, transforming the bridge from an object of dares to a living, breathing entity. It felt as though the darkness itself was angry, howling in a fury that rattled their bones. "We have come for you," a voice cried, distorted and unearthly, sending waves of icy fear washing over them. In that instant, panic seized them, and they turned to flee, hearts racing faster than they ever thought possible. But the bridge shuddered violently beneath them, rocks tumbling and rolling as if the very structure was alive. Faces twisted in agony seemed to rise from the depths, pale and haunting eyes filled with despair, reaching up toward them. The shadows thickened, closing in, wrapping around their legs like cold, slithering vines, squeezing the breath from their bodies. One by one, as fear consumed them, the children scattered, their bonds of friendship snapping like fragile twigs under pressure. They dashed across the bridge in a frenzied rush to escape the approaching darkness. Cries of alarm mingled with the furious whispers that licked at their heels, but the bridge was hungry. It stirred with a life of its own, awakened by their presence, a lure for even the bravest hearts. The full moon shone eerily above, illuminating the horror as night echoed with their terror. No longer were they just children testing their bravery, they had become prey in a sinister game. All those stories they had once scoffed at now became their reality, the shadows a living reminder of the sacrifices made at this accursed place. And then came the silence. The cries of fear were swallowed by the void, leaving only whispers in their wake. The bridge quaked beneath them, consuming everything, the last shreds of friendship, screams, and laughter, dissolving into echoes of despair. The darkness cared little about the past, merely waiting for the next offerings to satisfy its insatiable hunger, absorbing every bit of energy it could find. Months turned into seasons, and the tales of those children became the newest stories wrapped in the horror of lost innocence. Eldridge Hollow faded much like the echoes of their voices, becoming haunted by the memories of souls who had given their lives to the bridge. The village, once filled with laughter and chatter, grew quiet, each person becoming a pale shadow of who they were. Conversations turned somber. Footsteps softened as villagers glanced nervously toward the bridge, avoiding its dreadful gaze. Yet still, there were whispers in the darkness. When night fell, children gathered in circles, sharing daring stories of bravery, unknowingly flirting with danger. "Do you dare to go?" they would ask, eyes wide with a mixture of thrill and fear. The darkness answered them, encouraging their curiosity, wrapping its tendrils around the hearts of the young once more, like a spider preparing to catch its prey. As generations flickered by, the cycle of fear continued, with the bridge looming tall, its stones bearing witness to the horrors and tragedies that unfolded. It became not just an old structure but a monstrous symbol, a reminder that darkness held secrets of its own and would always hunger for more. The blood sacrifice bridge carried the weight of countless stories, each more tragic than the last, tying the moments together in a tapestry woven thick with sadness and woe. In the heart of Eldridge Hollow, the truth was buried deep. The villagers had tried to forget, but the shadows did not forget. They lingered, thirsting for life to sustain them, casting a dark cloud over the once bright, vibrant land. The very stones of the bridge whispered at night, tales of those lost, tales of those who ventured too close, and tales of darkness lurking just beneath the surface. The bridge remembered everything and everyone, and as the moon continued to rise in the sky, it held the promise of more offerings, forever binding the souls wandering amongst the remnants of forgotten lives. And so, the cycle continued, a waking nightmare hidden behind the facade of a quiet village, a harmony of horror that would echo through time, calling out to those who dared venture too close, waiting patiently to feast upon the innocent.